Mental illness as a crisis of meaning in modern society, when meaning breaks down. Have you ever felt a strange emptiness beneath the surface of a seemingly successful life? In a world that measures progress by wealth, technology, and convenience, the soul often remains neglected, unheard, and unseen. Welcome to Awake Within, a space where we confront the silent struggles of the modern mind. The quiet loneliness behind endless freedom, the loss of deeper purpose, and the fragile search for meaning in a world that rarely speaks of the soul. This video invites you to look beyond surface-level success and listen to the deeper call within. It's not about fixing what is broken, it's about understanding why we feel disconnected in the first place. And how true healing begins from the inside out. If you've ever sensed that there must be more to life than chasing achievements, you are in the right place. Join us. Let's awaken a strength that no external success can replace. Material progress, spiritual crisis. The paradox of modern society. Modern society prides itself on its achievements, scientific advancements, material comforts, food safety, and healthcare. Compared to our ancestors, we live longer, more comfortably, and are less threatened by poverty or war. Yet amid this brilliance, a silent paradox grows: the rate of mental illness has never been higher. In a world flooded with conveniences, people are becoming increasingly disconnected. Each technological advance seems to shorten physical distances but widen emotional ones. Though the modern soul is wrapped in external comfort, it faces an inner void and loneliness. An inevitable question echoes: why does greater wealth seem to bring deeper wounds? Healing begins by acknowledging this paradox. By not judging our feelings of emptiness, anxiety, or disorientation, we open the first door to return to ourselves. There is nothing wrong with feeling lost in a world optimized for comfort but neglectful of the soul's deepest needs, the need to connect, to belong, and to live meaningfully. This is not merely a personal crisis but the collective outcry of an era that has traded authentic living for smooth functioning. Yet within that outcry lies an opportunity. The opportunity for each person to embark on a journey of self-awakening and to build a life that is not only outwardly pleasant but also inwardly resilient. The isolated ego. When individualism wounds the soul. One of the hallmarks of the modern era is the celebration of individualism. People are increasingly encouraged to turn inward, assert their own worth, and seek happiness through personalized experiences. On the surface, individualism promises freedom. But beneath that surface, it leaves hidden wounds, isolation, fragmentation, and lingering emptiness. Since the 19th century, with the explosion of science, technology, and rationalism, humanity has moved away from external objective orders, such as religion, tradition, or community, and turned inward, making the self the new center. This is when a new archetype emerged, that a psychological individual, tirelessly exploring themselves yet confronting unprecedented instability. When all values are referenced back to the individual, every failure, every pain, every crisis becomes a personal burden. There is no one left to blame, no shared meaning to cling to, no enduring community to lean on. The ego, instead of being a strong center, becomes a fragile fortress, easily crumbling under its own weight. Extreme individualism gradually turns us into isolated islands. Instead of finding true freedom, we build invisible walls around ourselves. Freedom without connection has become a subtle prison, where people imprison themselves in personal narratives that never seem complete. Yet even within that isolation lies an opportunity for healing. Pain is not a sign of failure, but a reminder that we were not born to exist alone. Turning inward does not mean total isolation. It is the first step toward rebuilding meaningful connections, with ourselves, with others, and with life itself. We do not need to abandon our individuality. What is needed is to learn how to keep the ego soft, so it does not become an isolating prison but a bridge between the inner and outer worlds. True freedom does not come from building walls but from the courage to open the heart while maintaining inner integrity. The healing journey begins by daring to see loneliness not as a condemnation, but as a signal to rediscover a truer path to connection. Only when we can connect from an awakened and resilient self will we no longer need external validation to affirm our existence. Trapped between freedom and obligation, the tragedy of modern humans. The modern world glorifies personal freedom as one of its highest values. We are taught that we can choose our life paths, decide our destinies, and define our own meanings of life. Yet behind the brilliance of freedom, a silent tragedy unfolds. The more choices we have, the more lost we feel. Absolute freedom comes with the burden of full responsibility for every personal decision. In a world without fixed templates, each person must bear the heavy weight of self-definition. Simultaneously, we must still meet society's harsh demands, to succeed, to be recognized, and to meet ever-rising expectations. This contradiction creates a unique form of inner tension in our era, a yearning to live authentically, clashing with the heavy obligations society imposes. When the self longs to break free but reality forces adaptation, a painful rift forms within. This division not only weakens our inner strength but also leaves us fragile and vulnerable. Healing in this context demands that we redefine freedom. Freedom is not merely the ability to choose anything but the ability to discern what truly matters to us and to bravely pursue it despite external pressures. Accepting that we cannot satisfy every expectation is the first step toward inner liberation. Building inner strength means learning to listen deeply to the inner voice, to distinguish between a true calling and the echoes of societal demands. When we realize that each decision, even the smallest, is a declaration of who we are, we shift from being dragged by life to actively shaping it. Self-control arises from this awareness, knowing how to choose, how to say no, and how to stay true to core values even as the world around us constantly changes. Through this journey, step by step, we begin to awaken our inner selves, allowing each choice to emerge not from fear or pressure, but from profound self-understanding and the courage to live authentically. Mental illness, or the desperate cry of the soul. In today's world, any behavior that deviates from the norm is quickly labeled as mental illness. We fear abnormality, rushing to label and exclude. But psychiatrist Thomas Szasz once warned that many phenomena we call illness are actually painful reactions to the collapse of life's meaning. Szasz emphasized that not every strange behavior is a symptom of a medical disease. Sometimes, it is a person's struggle with unanswerable questions. Who am I? Why do I live? How do I survive in an increasingly alien world? In the silence and ultimate loneliness, the soul cries out for listening. But that cry is often silenced with cold diagnoses and hurried prescriptions. Instead of rushing to label or exclude, healing requires a shift in perspective. Seeing these painful expressions not as breakdowns to be hidden, but as signals of a profound crisis of meaning. They are cries for help. Signs that the inner being is desperately seeking another path, a reason to continue existing. Building inner strength begins with the courage to face pain instead of avoiding it. When we realize that crises do not weaken us but serve as opportunities to break down the decaying structures within, we truly grow. Wounds become doors to new awareness, and every step through darkness is a silent evolution of the soul. Self-control does not mean suppressing all unusual emotions but learning to listen to them deeply. It means understanding that behind fear and strange behaviors lies a soul yearning for salvation. Awakening the inner self means daring to ask, if this pain carries a message, what is it? If this crisis hides an opportunity, where can it be found? Only by listening to ourselves with patience and compassion can we truly walk through darkness, not as victims, but as pilgrims on a journey back toward the light. The collapse of old beliefs, a painful turning point for the meaning of life. The Enlightenment ushered in a brilliant era of reason and science. Humanity gradually shed traditional belief systems, liberating itself from long-standing dogmas. But while the light of knowledge illuminated the external world, a silent darkness spread within. For as faith in God faltered, humanity also lost the spiritual compass that had once guided it through life's shadows. Nietzsche warned that the death of God was not merely a philosophical event but a seismic shock that shook the very roots of human meaning. We killed God with our own hands. Yet we were unprepared for a world without a center, without an ultimate purpose, a world where each individual must shoulder the full weight of existence alone. In the wake of this disorientation, many people fell into states of confusion and despair. Without ready-made answers, the question of life's meaning grew haunting and heavy. We find ourselves adrift in a vast universe, no longer secured by any firm position or comforted by explanations for pain and injustice. Yet within this collapse, a new door quietly opens. Healing does not come from restoring outdated beliefs but from courageously building new meaning for our lives. The breakdown of old foundations invites us to begin an inner journey where we no longer seek external validation but redefine our goals and values for ourselves. Building inner strength in this age demands extraordinary courage, the courage to face the void, to endure uncertainty without absolute answers, and to craft a meaningful life from the smallest, most genuine sparks within us. Self-control is not merely about regulating behavior. It is the ability to stand firm amid an ocean of possibilities, not letting oneself be drowned in doubt or panic. It means choosing a direction even knowing there are no absolute guarantees, only a commitment to oneself. Awakening the inner self means realizing, if the world no longer hands us meaning, then we must light that flame ourselves. And in that fragile light, we do not merely survive, we grow, as free and purposeful souls. When freedom becomes a burden, the loneliness of absolute choice. We live in an era where freedom is celebrated as the ultimate value. No more rigid barriers of tradition. No single paths dictated by society. Instead, each individual stands before countless crossroads, free to shape the course of their own life. Yet here too, a silent tragedy unfolds. Absolute freedom becomes a colossal burden, and a quiet loneliness envelopes the soul. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is condemned to be free." In a world no longer anchored by fixed standards, we are forced to choose, and beyond that, to bear full responsibility for those choices. There is no one left to blame. Nowhere to hide. Every hesitation, every failure, becomes a direct conversation with oneself. Kierkegaard described this state in two extremes, losing oneself in the infinite, endlessly contemplating possibilities without ever acting. Or losing oneself in the finite, blending into the crowd, living a life that is never truly one's own. Either way, the result is a silent despair. A life that continues externally but has long lost its inner soul. Healing in this context does not come from escaping freedom but from learning to live alongside it. By accepting that there will never be perfect answers, that every decision carries risk and uncertainty, we begin to loosen the invisible chains tightening around our minds. Building inner strength means learning to stand firm before difficult choices. Daring to take responsibility for one's life without demanding validation from others. When we understand that imperfection is part of the journey, we can move forward with gentle but unwavering courage. Self-control is no longer about rigidly imposing rules on ourselves, but about the ability to listen to the deep inner voice. What truly reflects who we are, and what is merely a reaction to external pressure. Awakening the inner self happens when we realize that freedom is not a curse but the greatest gift. And that gift becomes truly complete only when we dare to walk, trembling if we must, on the path we have chosen. Knowing that it is the journey itself, not the destination, that gives life its deepest meaning. The rebellion of the mind. When existential crisis knocks. In the repetitive rhythm of modern life, waking up, working, eating, entertaining, sleeping, many people gradually lose the feeling of inner aliveness. At first, everything flows smoothly, following society's set tempo. But one day, in a moment of silence, a quiet question emerges: why? Why am I doing all this? What is it for? Albert Camus described this moment as when the question of absurdity erupts. A nameless fatigue, a weariness tinged with amazement, as if the veil covering life suddenly falls away, revealing the stark meaninglessness behind our daily routines. This is when the mind's silent rebellion begins, a rebellion against hollow repetition, against the false meanings we once accepted. Existential crisis is not a sign of weakness but a signal from a soul awake enough to no longer accept cheap answers. It is the necessary pain that rouses us from a soothing but meaningless slumber. It is the call to seek something deeper, truer, more worthy of our fragile existence. Healing in these moments does not come from quickly extinguishing the unease, but from having the courage to stay with it. To allow the pain to seep through us. To let doubt illuminate the dark corners of the mind. For only by descending fully into the depths of crisis can we find a new foundation for existence. Building inner strength means learning to endure the feeling of emptiness without rushing to fill it with meaningless distractions. It is knowing that this emptiness, if embraced, can become the necessary space for new meaning to emerge. Self-control during an existential crisis is the ability to observe the mind's turbulence without being swept away by it. It is knowing that while the mind may rebel, a deeper self remains present, silently witnessing, unbroken. Awakening the inner self happens when we realize, crisis is not the enemy, but the guide. Every rebellion of the mind is an opportunity to step out of old cycles and move toward a more authentic life, where we no longer live by habit, but by conscious choice. The void of meaning. The silent root of depression and addiction. One of the most silent yet dangerous characteristics of modern society is the deep void of meaning forming within each person. Amidst material comforts and endless entertainment options, people still feel the absence of something essential, a void that no distraction can truly fill. It is within this emptiness that phenomena like depression, addiction, and latent violence quietly erupt. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the harshest concentration camps, understood better than anyone that if a person cannot find meaning for their life, they gradually lose the will to live. He called this state the existential vacuum, a void not just of goals but of trust in the fundamental value of existence itself. In modern society, where old answers about meaning have collapsed and no new foundations have yet emerged, many people drift in uncertainty. They easily fall into immediate pleasures, material addictions, or depression when they can no longer find reasons to continue. Healing does not come from chasing new stimulations but from courageously facing the void itself. Instead of fearing it or hastily trying to fill it, we should treat it as fertile soil waiting to be seeded with new meaning. For it is within that empty space that life's true questions can begin to sprout. Building inner strength means daring to endure the unease of unanswered questions, trusting that patience will slowly reveal a path. It means learning to ask ourselves important questions. What truly moves my heart? What, however small, still makes my life feel worthwhile? Self-control in the thirst for meaning means refusing shallow quick fixes. It is knowing that filling the void with fleeting pleasures only deepens it. And that only by patiently digging into the depths of the soul can we find a true spring. Awakening the inner self happens when we realize, this void is not an enemy, but a sign that our soul is still alive, still yearning. And the journey to find meaning is not a burden, it is the greatest honor a human being can carry throughout their life. Lost in a world without tribes, the cost of isolation. Throughout most of human history, people lived in small communities where each individual played an irreplaceable role. Belonging to a tribe meant being seen, recognized, and feeling that one's existence mattered to the life of the whole. But modern society, despite all its remarkable advancements, has gradually dismantled this structure, pushing individuals into a crowded yet empty world. Sebastian Junger pointed out that in early societies, where survival depended on solidarity, rates of depression, suicide, and addiction were virtually non-existent. When connection was severed, when individual worth was no longer tied to community value, people began to lose their way. Today, we can live in cities of millions yet feel lonelier than ever. Isolation is not merely the absence of friends or family, but a deep disconnection from something greater than oneself, a sense of no longer belonging anywhere, no longer being part of any meaningful circle. And it is within this isolation that psychological wounds quietly expand: depression, addiction, anxiety, disorientation. Healing in this world requires extraordinary intentionality. With no natural tribes left to belong to, we must learn to consciously rebuild meaningful connections, seeking out or creating small communities and authentic relationships where each person is seen, heard, and accepted as they are. Building inner strength amid isolation also means becoming a tribe for oneself first, caring for oneself with the same patience, kindness, and recognition that a healthy community would offer its members. Self-control in an age of isolation means resisting the illusion of superficial connection, the empty likes, the meaningless messages, and instead patiently cultivating deep, authentic relationships, even if they must begin small and grow slowly. And awakening the inner self means understanding. We not only need to belong to others, we also need to belong to ourselves. When we can be fully present in our own lives, when we can be alone without feeling lonely, genuine connections will naturally blossom from there. Disconnection from nature, the tragedy of the modern soul. Humans once lived in harmony with the rhythms of the earth. Forests, rivers, and night skies were not just environments but extensions of the soul. But the modern world, with its concrete, machines, and frantic pace, has silently severed that sacred bond. And within that severance, a profound spiritual wound has formed. Carl Jung warned that when humans separate themselves from the living symbols of nature, their minds also begin to fracture. Deprived of these primal connections, we are prone to isolation not only from the outer world but also from our own inner being. Many existential crises, underlying anxieties, and depressions can be traced back to the loss of this natural belonging. Healing begins by restoring this lost connection. We don't need to abandon everything and retreat to the wilderness, just pausing to listen to the wind, observing the silent sway of a tree branch, or feeling the sun's warmth on our skin can begin to reweave the torn threads of the soul. Building inner strength also means rediscovering a sense of belonging to the universe, not through theory, but through living experience. It is the realization that we are not lone combatants against the world but children of the earth, upheld by a force far greater than ourselves. Self-control in the modern world demands awareness, knowing when to step away from screens, when to breathe deeply in nature, to realign the soul's order. And the awakening of the inner self happens when we realize, nature is not just a place to rest, it is a mirror reflecting our true essence. A living force that knows how to change, to heal, to endure, and always move toward the light. Embracing the inner darkness, the true beginning of healing. In the depths of every mind lie disowned parts, fear, anger, jealousy, weakness, secret desires society deems unacceptable. Carl Jung called this the shadow. And paradoxically, the more we deny the shadow within, the more powerfully it controls us, subtly and destructively. True maturity does not come from striving for perfection but from daring to face the darkness within. Every shadow part holds a fragment of life's energy, a potential that has yet to be freed. Denying the shadow means losing access to the full experience of oneself. Accepting it marks the beginning of becoming wholly ourselves. Healing begins with this courage, daring to listen to uncomfortable emotions, to acknowledge unflattering thoughts, to face pains never before named. Not allowing the shadow to define us, nor pretending it doesn't exist, but learning to coexist with it under conscious awareness. Building inner strength means being able to hold ourselves steady amid internal conflict. Knowing we can feel anger without being ruled by it. Feel fear without freezing our hearts. It is embracing all the pieces of ourselves, both light and dark, without losing honesty with our deepest essence. Self-control also begins with understanding the shadow within so that we are not unconsciously driven by it. It is the ability to observe our emotional reactions, trace them back to their roots, and choose actions aligned with our true values, rather than mere impulsive urges. Awakening the inner self means realizing, the shadow is not the enemy. It is a silent companion, reminding us of all that remains unhealed, all the untapped potentials within us. Only by embracing the darkness can the inner light blossom in its truest form. Rebuilding inner strength. The journey of self-control and growth. After all the revelations and confrontations, the healing journey does not end with mere comfort. It leads us into a new phase. The phase of building inner strength, of mastering self-control from a foundation of profound self-understanding. Rebuilding inner strength does not mean denying weakness but acknowledging it as a natural part of being human. It is learning to stand firm even when afraid, to keep moving even when in doubt, and to choose to love life even in its darkest moments. Self-control at this stage is no longer rigid suppression but a conscious harmony between reason and emotion. We know when to remain silent and listen, when to act to defend core values, and when to let go in order to grow. Maturity does not mean becoming invincible, it means embracing our vulnerability and still choosing to live fully. It is daring to hold both our limits and our infinite potentials within ourselves. When inner strength is restored, we no longer live as fugitives or fighters, we live as understanding, courageous, and free beings. And in that freedom, we not only heal ourselves but quietly become a source of light for others around us. The journey through existential crises, inner isolation, and shattered meaning is not meant to make us despair or surrender. On the contrary, it opens up an opportunity, the opportunity to return, to heal, and to rebuild a life rooted in the deepest truth within each of us. In this chaotic modern world, inner strength does not come from avoiding pain but from facing it with understanding and courage. Self-control is no longer a battle against oneself but the art of harmonizing the seemingly opposing parts of the soul. And the awakening of the inner self is not a destination, but a living process, choosing every day to live consciously, to connect genuinely, and to create meaning even amidst the void. By embracing both the darkness and the light within, each of us can become a solid anchor in this fragile world. And within this journey, we not only find ourselves again, we discover a new source of life, strong, resilient, and radiant.